Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I thought we'd talk a little bit about performing different FTP operations. Now, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically working with a remote server. So we can look at directories, we can look at files, we can upload, download, delete them, create folders, all the normal stuff you can do on your computer, but now you're operating remotely on a server somewhere. This can be extremely useful for transferring files, amongst other things, being able to download things, and maintain remote servers at times. So I thought, there are lots of different approaches out there. Previously, typically we'd look at a lot of APIs, and then there are other specialized software out there that you can utilize for this type of thing. But I thought to myself, let's explore a little bit more curl, which is built into Windows. So we don't even need to go get any third-party tools. It's already baked into Windows 10, Windows 11. It's there for us to use. So why not use it? So let's just dive in. The article you'll see here is broken into two basic, sections, really large sections. And you're going to see they're going to look like they're repeating themselves, but they really are two distinct things. At the top, you're going to see all of these directory listing, delete, blah, blah, blah. And if you just scroll down a little bit, you're going to see the exact same sections. Okay, now why is that? Well, quite simply, the top section here is just showing you the basic curl commands. What do the curl commands give us? Well, if you're not in a programming environment, you can open up your command prompt and you could literally copy paste this and you could use it directly in a command prompt. So you can use this if we're talking of an unsecured, you could use this to download images, let's say from a website, just as much if you wanted to go behind a secured FTP and go download content, upload content, change file structure. You can do it all through the command prompt. So I give here some examples of the basic commands. Now, obviously, you need to go here and change where I put your username. You have to actually put what your FTP credentials are. I don't know what they are. I'm just showing you. And this gives you a general idea of how that command would be built. And then here you'll see a typical output, let's say, from that command. And this is another variation of the same command, but using an extra option, which simplifies the output. As you can see here, this is detailed. You get the different permissions. You get detail about the files and the folders when they were created, things like that. Or if you just need a list, a simplified list, well, then you just throw on this extra argument and you get a simplified list. Same goes for checking if a file exists. I'm showing you how you go about it. If a directory exists, uploading files, downloading files, delete, make directory, delete directory. It's all there for you to be able to dissect and understand a little bit before we dive into the next section, which is really getting into the VBA part of things, which is what my website's really about at the end of the day. I will, however, take a minute here to back up. We're going to look at these general comments because they are key. Whatever you're doing when you're doing any form of communication over the internet, in this case we're talking about FTP, make sure you're using the SSL required argument. Always. Don't do it without that. Okay, you need to ensure that you have encryption in place. Test. It's nice that I'm giving you these commands. They may not work for you, or I'm going to look at a couple reasons why. But be sure that you have a folder that you can go and mess around with, and that if you lose the data, you're not going to be upset. So test, do your legwork first before you just throw this into production and hope everything goes smoothly, and then get mad if it doesn't. Come on. So test in development and test environments before going to your production environment. You'll also see here, these commands don't have it. I worked them out. They work for me. So these are the actual commands. But when you're in development mode, trying to figure out, what do I need to put? Do I need a backslash? Do I need the SSL or Q? Why isn't the, sometimes you just come here and you add the, where is it? -V for verbose. So you just tack it on to the end of any of these commands, and it will spit out substantially more of an output than you typically get from just the normal command. It's a verbose output. So you're going to be able to go over all the details, and you're going to perhaps get more detailed information as to what the error, what the problem is, where it's disconnecting. It didn't authenticate. The folder doesn't exist. It will give you a lot more information until you work out the proper command structure that works for you. So why do I keep saying, for you? It may not work for you. Well, it depends on the flavor of server you're connecting to. So are you connecting to a Linux? Are you connecting to a Windows? And even then within there, sometimes there can be differences depending different versions of each one of these. So you'll see here, if I look at the delete folder, where are you? I'm not seeing it. Delete a directory, sorry. You'll see here, I'm using RMD, remove directory. But there are cases where that won't work. And in some cases you have to use del, DELE. There are different variations of the commands depending on the server you're connecting to. I think I may actually have written this in the delete. Yeah, here in the delete file I specify. You see, there are variations. See, for deleting a file, you have RM, but you also have delete or DELE. Depends on the server, depends on what you're connecting to. And that's why I say that some of these commands, although they work for me and you may go to try to implement the exact same thing, and it may not work for you. And that's where you're going to have to try a couple different variations sometimes. And you may have something that works fine for your current use, and then you're going to need to FTP to another server, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And this is probably the cause. But that's where this -V verbose can really become helpful, amongst other things. And we're going to look at this now. Okay, you're going to see here all of my functions are built very similarly. And that's a reason why. It's because we're always doing the same thing. We're building a curl command and then we're executing it. So the process is always the same. What changes a little bit is which options, which arguments we're using. And therefore that will also change minimally the input arguments into our functions. That said, when we use curl, curl can give us output. It can give us general output, which you'll see if you run in the command prompt, but it also can provide us with what is called exit codes and error messages. And in reality, these are key pieces, key components that if we want to know if our functions worked, we actually need to get that data. So to this, we actually want to add and tell curl to add to it. We want to see the exit code. We want to see the error message. We may want to see the HTTP response codes. We can go get all sorts of extra information. Why do I want the exit code? Quite simply, whenever you run a curl command, at least when we're talking FTP and whatnot, it returns an exit code, whether it's visible to us or not. It's there, and if it's 0, it means the curl command worked properly. Anything besides 0 means we have a problem, and that's when we want that error message because it's going to detail that problem. So to that end, and I'm going to get to the function in a minute, but I build up my curl command in a way that I'm gathering all this extra information. So I need a way to extract that from all my functions to identify if they ran properly, etc. To do this, I created this helper function. And all it does is right here. It's going to take whatever I'm getting returned by curl. And I'm using 2 byref arguments here for the exit code and the error message. So we're going to return those 2 values. And we're also going to output the cleaned up output. We can also control the delimiter, although so far VBLF is all I've ever needed, but I've made it optional. If ever that changes, I can just change my call, and I'm flexible that way. But basically what this does is it's going to take this log file content, it's going to split it based on lines here, and it's going to go get, because the way I've set mine up, it's going to be the last and before last lines, and it's going to go get the exit code and the error message for me. So then when I call this stuff, I'm able to quickly identify, did my exit code return 0? If it did, I'm happy. Everything's good. We have success. If I didn't get a 0, well then, A, I have a problem. We failed. But B, now I can look at my error message and go, okay, what exactly went wrong? And return that to the user or the developer here in this case. So I just wanted to point out this very important helper function for everything below to work properly. So let's dive in. Let's take a look at how all this works. You're going to see all the codes here, but I'm going to switch now to VBA. We get some syntax highlighting and coloring and things like that. Just makes it a little easier to work with. And let's look at our first example here of a directory listing. How do my functions work? Let's just look at a very high level initially, because they're all set up in the same manner. What I'm doing here at the very beginning is I'm validating if a temporary file exists, because I'm using this for my output of the results of the curl command. So if it does exist, okay, I'm going to come here, I'm going to build up the proper path. So I'm using the temp folder, and I've made my temporary file. I've called it curl output.txt. It can be named anything, makes no difference. And here I'm coming, I'm saying, does that file exist? Because if it does, I want to kill it. I want to get rid of it, delete it. I want to know I'm starting off my command today with a blank slate. Now that that's done, now I'm going to come here, and what you're going to see all here is I'm building up my command. So we start off with that essential curl. We add on, I always want to see that encryption requirement. Then I have an option for how much time I allow commands to run for. So you can set a max time, but it's an optional component, so it won't always be there. You can ignore server certificates. I don't recommend that, however, but in some scenarios you're going to need it. And today for my demos, the way I've set this up, I actually require that option. And then here's that whole thing about a detailed listing. Do I want a simplified or a detailed listing? And then I come and build up the rest, the FTP with the domain, the port, the path to the folder we want to query. I'm adding that username and password. And lastly, I'm now attacking on that I want in the output these extra tidbits of information. I want that exit code. I want that error message. I'm also adding on the HTTP code that I'm not currently using, but in certain scenarios can be useful too. Then I'm coming down here and I'm using a DOS redirect, pushing whatever the output of this command is going to be to my temporary text file. Now you're going to see here I've got some commented lines here, and you're sure some of you more advanced developers are saying to yourself, why are you pushing out to a text file, deleting, updating, reading? A lot of I/O operations going on there, and I don't disagree with you for 1 second. That wasn't my first choice. I tried going the route of the clipboard. I have tried and tried and tried. It doesn't seem to work properly. There's something there. I think it's a timing issue. I'm still going to continue to explore. I would like to get around it. I managed to get around it with when I was working with the PowerShell, so I'm hoping I'll get there. But as of today, it was not a reliable solution. That's why I still have it commented here. I'm still working on it. But for today, we're still working with a hard file on the hard drive. I have in all my commands an option for debug mode. So as I'm developing, as I'm testing, if I want to be in debug mode, then it will spit out that command and I can see what has it generated exactly. And then you can test that directly in the command prompt. Sometimes that's much simpler to debug things. And then here in the debug mode also, I have, do I show the command prompt and the command and everything to the user, or do I not show it and I just run it? Okay, so in production, you wouldn't want to normally show this. You just want it executed. Once it runs, right, that text file has been generated. Now I'm taking that file, I'm going to read the contents, and I'm going to push it to my parsing function that we saw earlier. And with that, I'm then able to pull out exit code, message, and any output that may have occurred. And I return just the output as part of the function. But you're going to see, how do we use this? And that's the important thing. So I'm going to jump right back up to the top where I've created these test routines. So what I have here is how I go about calling this FTP routine. So I just called it curl directory listing test. As you can see here, I'm defining a variable for the curl exit code, one for the exit message or error message, should I say, and then its general output. Remember, the function will return a cleaned up version of the output minus things like the HTTP code, the error exit code, and the error messages, okay? So then I just call my function. So where am I going? I'm going to this server on this port. I'm going to this folder specifically because this is the folder I want to see what's inside it. This is my username that gives me access to that server, and this is the password to gain access to this server. And then here we pass these two variables we created, and they're going to get populated with the information when this runs. And then here we have other options. As you can see, let's just see where we're at. Do we want a detailed listing? Okay. Do we want to add some type of max time, execution time? So typically no. In my case for today, for demo purposes only, yes, I am ignoring the certificates. We're going to just jump over that. So what's going to happen? This is going to run. This will return just the output. Sometimes we use it, sometimes we don't, but I'm always going to capture it nonetheless. For this purpose, we're going to come here and you're going to see we need to check the exit code. And that's where we're going to then come down here and see if the exit code was equal to 0. 0 means everything went well. So we have success. And now I'll just output I'll just print in the immediate window. It could be a message box to the user, whatever, that output. If it isn't 0, then we come to the else. And in which case, then I'll output the specific exit code because it's not 0. So let's see what it is. And the resulting error message. So let's just take a glance at how this works. We're just going to come here and we're going to do a couple different things. Let's run it, number one, just au naturel. So if we run this, everything should run smoothly. We come, and as you can see, we got curl success, so curl success, and then it debug prints the output of the directory listing, which is going to be the listing of the files in that folder. Which folder? In this folder on that server. So it worked. Okay, let's take a look. Well, that's fine. Let's switch this guy to true. So the same command, but now we're saying, give me the detailed listing. So we run it, give it a second, and there you go. We've got the more detailed version of the previous listing. Okay, so we now know how some of this works. Let's take things further as a developer. Like I said, I have a debug mode. So let's just engage it for a second. What does that give me extra? Well, what it gives you is when it runs, it's going to go open the command window, so you'll see it being executed live. It's generated here the actual command that it ran, so you could even test further. And once you close this guy, then it's going to move on and continue checking the rest of the function here. And it's going to output like we always do. So the two benefits is you get to see the command prompt and you get this output, so you can actually see what's being run. Okay, so when you're initially setting things up, it can be very useful. Now, up until now, everything's been glorious. Let's have a little fun. I make a typo and I run it. What's going to happen? We're going to cause an error, right? So the exit code, if all goes well, will not be equal to 0. So let's see what happens. We enter it. It's going to have to wait for a bit of a timeout. So depending on what things happen, and you'll see something, well, if I spelt properly, would have been written went wrong. And now you're seeing an exit code of 67, access denied. And it's even giving you the HTTP response of 530, which you could go look up. But access denied is pretty straightforward. It's telling you there's a problem. You don't have permission to even access this server folder. So you know there's something wrong with your username or password. So then we just fix. And in reality, we should be fixing that guy too. And I had that same mistake everywhere. So we'll fix a few of them. But now it's fixed and we run it again. And everything should work again. So that's it. You now understand the basics of all my functions because they're all set up the exact same way. You're always going to run them and then check. And you understand basically most of the input variables. I'll also just put a quick little statement here to anyone that wants to try. This username and password will not be valid by the time this airs. So don't even waste your time trying to hack my server. There's always a few. Okay, so we did the first one, which is, well, the simplest one, just getting a directory listing. So now we move down and we go to our next one, which is how do we upload a file? So we want to take a file from our computer and we want to upload it into the cloud onto this server. As you're going to see here, we've got very similar arguments. So we're going to domain, the port, the path, the username, the password, that exit code, the error message. But what's important here is the file. Which local file do we want to upload to the path that we're telling here? Don't forget, this is where it's going to go. It's going to go to this path, what we specify here. There's also, do we want to create that path if it doesn't exist? Or do we want it to error? Because you could just say, whoa, the folders don't even exist and just spit out an error and okay, that's the end of the command. Or we could say, no, if it doesn't exist, create it at the same time that you're uploading the file. So you have both options. It's an optional argument. So same thing as always, we come here, we build up our command. Once we get there, we run it. We then parse the output and then we check what the output gave us. What's that command? Well, what you need to know for uploading is we're going to use that -t. Now, I think it's important to just briefly take one quick step back. I've sort of jumped into curl probably a little fast for some of you. And some of you are probably asking, like, how do I know that I got to use double dash max time? How do I know I got to use single dash lowercase k? And here it's a single dash uppercase t. And this dash w, like, I know some of this is seeming a little Chinese. It's quite simple. If you go and check on the documentation for curl, they'll have what's called the Manpage, which is the help file. And here they're all listed. They have examples. So if we just check that -t, and I'm just going to keep going until I find the proper, because this is not the right one. Where are you, -t? If we click here, we'll bring, okay, -t can also be represented by --upload -file. These two terms are interchangeable. So when you just see a single dash, it's a simplified version. When you see the double dash, it's the more, verbose version of the command or option. So then you can come here and you can read all the details, and there may be other options relative to it. But as you can see, upload the specified local file to the remote URL. So that's what -t does. And that's why we need it here. We've got to do the -t remote, load the remote file. So that's where that file, our file on our local PC, to the folder that we're going to be FTPing to. The rest is all the exact same scenario. So now if we come up to the top here, we can look at an upload test, and it's the same scenario. We're connecting to this server on this port. We're going to this specific folder, and we're going to upload this local file to that folder. And then here's my username, my password. Remember those two variables to get the exit code and error messages. And then we get into, you see here, I'm putting a max timeout. I don't want this to run indefinitely. Some commands can really run a long period of time before they error out. I'm going to set it at 10 seconds. Okay, if it doesn't manage to upload this small little text file in 10 seconds, something's not right. Obviously, you're uploading big files. 10 seconds won't be long enough, right? And then we just go through it, and we can now test it out. So, come here, test it. Because I'm in debug mode, I got this that opened up very quickly, and I saw that it uploaded it instantaneously. And then I can come here and I can see curl success. Why do I know it's curl success? Because the exit code returned 0, so everything was fine. There was no output in this context. But as you can see, once again, we can test any of this out in 2 seconds. And we can make this also seamless to the user and just run it. And now we have to wait for the timeout. And there we go, we get that access denied. We could come here, right? And this is the, do you want to create the folder if it doesn't exist? We're going to leave it as false, okay? And I'm going to come here, I'm going to say I want to upload it to folder Z. Now let's see what happens. Of course, here you go. And it gives us this error. I find it a little peculiar. I would have hoped curl would be a little bit, I don't know, more intelligent or a better error message, but it goes, something went wrong. So we know it didn't work. Error number 9, and server denied you change to the given directory. Now, that's a bit generic because you can be denied change to a directory because of permissions too. So this doesn't explicitly mean that the folder doesn't exist. Okay, you normally will get that access denied error. I'll give you that, but it still isn't 100% a great error message. But nonetheless, if we switch this to that true, where it will create the folder when it doesn't exist, now when we run it, there you go. So it created the Z folder, then it uploaded the file to it. And we can prove that now by resetting this to false. Oops. Rerunning the command, and there it did it, and there was no issue with the Z directory. So as you can see, it's a very powerful tool. It's called, as you can see here, once we build our function, single line calls. And now you have full access to pretty much everything you can do with FTP. Now you can automate through Access, Excel, any of the VBA environments that you can possibly need. So we looked at the upload. I guess it's just logical now to look at the download. So the download function, like I say, it's always the same basic structure, but you're going to come here, domain, port, the path, and then here, the file to download. Then username, password, exit code, error message. Then the file, you're going to save it locally known as. So you have the path and file name extension to give that file that's being downloaded. So in reality, you can rename a file. It doesn't have to be the same name. And then that's typical max time. Ignore the server certificates. And if you want to be in debug mode, you come here. And if you look at the commands, you'll see that it all is played out right here. So it's that -O. Once again, you can turn to the man pages. And if we do a search here, just have to find it. Oops, where am I going? -O, -O. --output. So you can use either or, and it explains here that here is the file you're going to output it as. So that's what I do. And then we run it, we get the content, we parse it out, and so on and so forth. So if we come here, you'll see I'm coming to the server, port 21. I'm going to this specific folder. I'm looking for this file in that folder. I'm connecting with these credentials, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to save it locally as mail2.txt. I could call it anything I want. It doesn't make a difference. So this is the beauty here. You can choose to use the same name if you want, or this is an opportunity to rename it if that's what you need to do in your situation. Then the timeout period, etc., etc., etc. So if we test the download, right now I'm in debug mode. So it opened up the dialog, it opened up the command prompt for me. It's output the entire command. When it's done, I get a success. Let's switch out of the debug mode. Okay, we could leave it empty or we'll put a false. And let's have a little bit of fun and let's go and change. I made a typo. So what happens? We run it and there you go. The file does not exist. You can't get much clearer than that. So you could use this type of scenario to capture that error message and return it to the user possibly. So as you can see, very simple. None of this is very complicated. It really is just a question of learning how to build up those curl commands and then taking the basic function framework and just adding the missing argument or not. Deleting files, creating directories, testing for files, all of this stuff, it's all the same. Okay. File exists. Well, let's take a look at that before we jump to the deleting of the file. So file exists. As you can see, this is one way of going about it. You could try to bind to it for some reason. And that's actually what I'm going to do here. If you look here, domain port path, the file, and the rest we are all familiar with by now. And here you'll see it all hinges on this. So I'm going to bind to the file, but I'm going to say to curl, I'm not trying to download it. I'm not trying to delete it. Just send me the head of the file. And that will instantaneously either work, and we're going to get a tidbit of information about the file, or it won't work. We're going to get an error back, and then we know the file doesn't exist. But that's basically it. We run it, we get the content, we parse it, and so on and so forth. So if we come here and we look at the file exists test, and we'll run it normally, right? So off of a file we know exists, the mail text, we run it. I'm in debug mode, so I get the pop-up again of the command prompt. We see that it ran instantaneously, and there you have it. So we know it exists, and the head returns this type of information. It gives us when it was created, how big a file it is, and things like that. So let's turn this off. We'll make this false. And now let's make it a file that doesn't exist. We run it, and there you go. File does not exist. And that's the beauty here of this approach by going with the head, is we can instantaneously know if it works just based on the error code. I don't even need to look at the output. I don't need to look at error messages and exit codes beyond it being 0. If you ask for the head of the file and it returns 0, you know it worked. The file exists. There was something there to come back. So I'm able to say that it was successful. I could make this into a function that returns true or false, very simply. Anything other than 0, it doesn't work. The file doesn't exist. So there you have it. The file exists. Very simple to do. Then we can get into deleting a file. Deleting the file is going to be simple in the sense that what we have to actually do is there's no direct curl command to say delete a file. What we're going to do instead is we're going to connect to the remote server, and then we're going to tell the server, would you please run this command for me? And that's what the -q does. Okay. And with the -q, the command we're telling it to do is this command here. We're telling it to run a DELE in my case on my server. For you, it might be delete. It could be an RM. It depends on the type of server. And then here I'm giving it the path and the file to delete. That's it. So if we come back up to the top and we come down to the delete, you'll see we connect to the server, the port, go into this folder, and I want you to delete this file specifically using this username, this password. So we can go and test it out. What happens? I'm in debug. Once again, I got a pop-up. It flashed. It ran very quickly. It's done. And when I do it, you'll see it's done. Curl succeeded. And then it outputs the listing that's in that folder currently. And as you'll see, that mail text that was there is no longer part of that listing. It's gone. So you have another form of confirmation. So what happens if we now try to run it a second time? Once again, because I'm in debug mode, and you'll see here I got a curl 21 failed with 550. Okay, and we run it here, and you'll see I'm capturing that error in the exit code, so I know it didn't work. It didn't manage to delete that. And you can go investigate what an HTTP code 550 is if you want, but as you can see, it failed. It didn't work. So it's very simple. It's always the same thing. 0 means it worked. Anything else, we have a problem. So the next function I'd like to look at is simply for creating directories. Now it's fine that in the upload, the file upload function, I already have that functionality included, but sometimes we don't always want or need to be working with files. Sometimes we just want to do a very simple structural change to a directory, add a folder, or perhaps it's a nested folder structure. That makes no difference in this context. This is one thing where curl really works well. And if you look at the function that I created for this, and you come down, you'll see here we have domain, the port, the path, so the parent path, and then here is the new structure, the structure we want to at least validate. And the rest is all the common stuff, name, password, exit code, error message, etc., etc., etc. It's all done with this one line, and there's no actual parameters to add. Basically what we're telling it, if you look at the line above, is we're telling go to this domain, this port, this path, and we tack on this new structure. So go to this specific folder. Now, if the folder doesn't exist, this option then says create those missing directories. So it can be more than one level deep. So you don't just have to create a folder at a time. If you've got 12 nested folders, you can just include them all in this path and new directory, and all 12 will be created in one go. That's truly beautiful. And you can also look any of these commands up, like I mentioned before, by going to the Manpages, the help documentation, and you'll see it's right here. This is what it is. And you'll see here that it even says, creates missing directories. It's in plural, not singular. So pay attention to that. But once again, we have this really nifty option. All we have to do is tack it into our existing command structure. And now, by doing this, you'll automatically create any structure you need to. So if we come here, what am I doing? I'm going to my parent folder of files, and I'm telling it, go create this structure ABC. Okay, really simple. I'm still in debug mode, so I'm going to get the pop-up over here. As you can see, very fast, milliseconds, pops up, it's done, and you come here, success. And it then spits out the file listing for the furthest in, so the C. So I went into all these folders, subfolders. It created the A if it didn't exist. It created the B if it didn't exist. It created the C if it did not exist. And I can tell you in this scenario, none of them did. And then it returns a listing of what's in it. So if it already existed, well, then you'd see that there's a file in it, which implies basically it didn't create anything. It already existed. However, in this scenario, you can clearly see nothing. There are no files. You can just go backwards to the parent folder. So really, really straightforward. So we create a folder, or directory. How do we delete one? Once again, very simple. But once again, curl cannot directly act upon the server in that manner. Okay, no one from the outside should be able to do that to begin with. What the approach we're going to use, same as for file deletion, is we're going to use the -q, which is right here. And we're going to pass it a command that we're asking it to run locally. So the command is rmd, remove directory, and then we tell it the full path to the last directory. Now we have to do these one at a time. Unlike creating, deletion has to be done one at a time and can only be done once the directory is empty. So this can become a little bit more tricky. You may need to use the file listing, delete all of the files first, then proceed to do the directory deletion. So let's take a look. Like I say here, you just come here, your parent path, and then here is which directory do we actually want to delete. The rest is all the similar. So if we come back up here and we take a look at it actually being used, as you can see here, I'm coming here and I'm saying I want to go into directory files AB. We just created ABC. So I'm going to go into B, and then I'm telling it delete C. And the rest of the information is all standard. And you can then run it. I'm in dev mode, so I get this that shows up very quickly. Sorry about that. There you go. Very quickly, it's done. And you can then come here and see curl success, and there you go. And this is giving you a listing in reality of the parent folder that we were in, so of B. So then if we wanted to then delete B, we would first have to make sure there are no files, and then you could run this same command here, but this time putting as the parent the A, and so on and so forth. And I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video, for this first go at using curl to perform FTP operations. You know, the sky's the limit here. These are very basic implementations of some of these commands. Obviously, we can further improve upon them, and I hope that with some time, perhaps I will be working on them. No guarantees at this point in time, but I wanted to illustrate that we have built-in tools. We don't need to go download other software necessarily. We don't need to necessarily get into any advanced APIs and deal with 32-bit, 64-bit, and all these things. We have built-in things that we can simply use shell to execute and run these commands. And that's what curl provides to us. It's a very simple way to go about it. Obviously, you know, deleting directories, this is the type of function that I think I would be concentrating further on, and making it first extract a listing of files, deleting all those files. Only once the listing is empty, then proceed with the deletion of the directory. So perhaps a function I will continue to work on a little bit. Don't forget, regardless of what you think or do moving forward, if you take my functions and decide to rework them in your own way, which is fine. This is why I put this stuff up here. It's in, you know, these are learning tools, but I want you to be able to then take them and make them your own as you need. But just whatever you do, please, 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 anything you're doing remotely over the internet with curl, and we're not just talking FTP here. FTP is one of many things curl makes available to us, but just make sure you're using the SSL required option. Okay, you don't want to be connecting to remote servers in plain text and having usernames and passwords available for anyone to basically harvest out of the thin air of the internet and then be able to do really nasty things to your servers. Protect yourselves, and the SSL required is a minimum for anything you're doing remotely. Obviously, if you're contained within your own network and you know you're secure and whatever, and you want to take that extra chance, perhaps that's up to you. But the minute you go outside of your organization, you know, be forewarned. Security is number one. Just like don't do anything if you're looking at APIs, third-party software. Whatever you do, don't just do FTP. Do SFTP or FTPS, whatever. Make sure you're using secured FTP routines. That's basically all I'm saying. Just like when you go onto a website to do banking, you want to make sure that that lock is there. You're using HTTPS, secure, right? It's the same thing with curl. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So I'm stopping here. I hope some of this is helpful to you guys. Particularly, uploading and downloading files is so simple to do. More advanced stuff, getting into structural of directories, as you saw with file uploading, is really, really straightforward. Or if it's just independently, you want to create a structure before you start uploading all sorts of other files, you also saw that's very simple. Be very careful when you're deleting. Test. You just don't want any nasty surprises that you put in the wrong parameter and you wipe out a directory that actually was important, because there are no backups with this, right? So make sure you're testing on test servers, on test folders that you can afford to accidentally wipe out until you're 100% sure of the proper syntax. I've done my best here to break things down and try to make it somewhat comprehensible. But as always, this stuff is here for you guys to learn from and expand on and take further. I am, like I said, I am going to be returning to my initial, well, not just this function, but all my functions. I really, really want to manage to eliminate all these I/O and writing to a temp file, reading the temp file. It's just not the right way to be doing this. It's the only way I can do currently, because there seems to be some type of timing issue or something. But nevertheless, all of this to say is I am going to work on this some more. I'm hoping to somehow manage to get this clipboard scenario working properly. If and when that happens, I'll update the article for sure, update all those functions, and they switch over to using the clipboard instead of a temp file. But for right now, this still works really well. As you can see, we're able to extract exit codes, error messages, and the actual genuine output. So I'm happy on that front, and they do work for what they're supposed to be doing. I just like to optimize them further. As always, I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to watch my videos. I'd love some feedback. It's always welcome. Like to know if you guys think that you will perhaps try some of these functions out, see what curl has to offer to you. I'd also just briefly mention, like I said, curl can do a whole bunch of stuff. FTP is just one of them. I have an article, I will include the link below, but that you can use curl for sending emails. So, that's perhaps another option available to us as the new Outlook kills VBA. Perhaps sending emails via curl will be the solution. It's very simple, compared to getting into the Graph API. Graph API is great, lots of power under the hood, but very complicated at the same time. To that initial load to get things functional, the authentication token, all that stuff, although beautiful, very powerful, gives you all sorts of options and capabilities. Sometimes a simple thing like curl may be the better answer for some people. So I will include a link if you want to go take a peek at that. That's also a function I will be revisiting, because as I develop these functions, I learned even more about curl. So I want to take that existing email routine for curl and just up it a notch. So there'll be an update on my existing article for emailing pretty shortly. As always, thank you. Like, share, subscribe. I'd love some comments, guys. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Have a great week.